Excuse me. My name is Andrea Parker, and I'll be presenting work that was done in collaboration with one of my PhD students, Farnaz, Irannejad, Bisafar. This is part of her dissertation research. She wasn't able to be here today, unfortunately, so I'll be presenting this on our behalf. So low-income neighborhoods face significant and persistent barriers to wellness. These barriers are social, economic, and structural in nature. And one promising way of addressing these challenges is through youth-led activism. So there are many organizations throughout the world that have created youth-led programs focused on activism. And these programs have the goal of empowering youth to identify issues within their communities and address these concerns. So these organizations often help youth to educate and mobilize their peers around issues of common concern. And while these programs are youth-led, the adults play an important role. They provide youth with critical resources needed to engage in these social action initiatives, for example, through training, mentorship, and connections to community stakeholders. Yet little research has explored how technology might support the work that youth and adults do in these empowerment contexts. In particular, our work has explored how social computing platforms are used within youth empowerment organizations. Specifically, we want to understand how these sorts of platforms help youth to educate and mobilize their peers around social issues of concern, and how social computing mediates the absolutely critical relationships between the adult staff and the youth. We are specifically focused on social computing platforms such as Facebook and Twitter because they offer clear opportunities for activism, as has been demonstrated by the various social movements that have unfolded recently and currently on these platforms. Prior work has documented how, for youth, social networking platforms offer access to often large, articulated social networks. They are platforms on which youth can create and circulate their ideas about social causes and mobilize action. And prior work has also documented how, in particular for low-income youth and youth of color, these platforms provide really critical communities of support for youth who often lack access to power and influence that's needed to engage in social action. At the same time, researchers have begun to explore the barriers that exist to using these sorts of platforms for activism. For example, in our prior work, we documented how when youth try to engage in social action online, they get pushback often by their peers who expect them to be posting content that is entertaining and not serious, as posting about social justice issues often is. So given the benefits and challenges of social computing platforms for supporting activism amongst youth, and the lack of work examining the role of such tools within youth empowerment organizations, we sought to answer this broad question in our research. So to begin, we studied a youth empowerment organization in the Northeast United States. The goal of this organization is to empower youth by helping them to identify problems with their communities and to develop and carry out initiatives that address these problems. The issues that they focus on vary. For example, youth are focused on building stronger relationships between police and youth and addressing issues of racism. The youth within this organization are employed, so they're paid for their work, and approximately 12 to 15 youth partner with 2 to 3 staff at each site to engage in these initiatives. The youth and adults in this organization employ a variety of social computing platforms to advance their goals. For example, the organization itself had a Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram account, and the posts on these accounts varied and included content promoting events, posts focused on fundraising, as well as news articles that describe the organization's achievements. Youth also use their personal Facebook and Twitter and Instagram accounts to post content that's related to their work at the organization. So they often posted photos and videos and flyers that called attention to their events. So we conducted a qualitative study to explore our research questions, which started with semi-structured interviews with staff to understand their perspectives on how technology is currently being used in the organization. We then carried out a round of focus groups with youth to explore how they were using social computing currently and their perspectives, and then a final round of focus groups groups with youth again to understand their perspectives on how technology could better help them communicate with their desired audiences in the future. We conducted an inductive thematic analysis of our interview and focus group transcripts to arrive at the themes that are presented in the paper, some of which I will discuss today. So our analysis was guided by an object-oriented publics theoretical lens. So first, I'll quickly review the concept of publics. This concept has been richly developed within the social sciences by researchers such as John Dewey and has become an influential organizing framework within HCI, particularly in work focused on the use of technology for civic engagement. So in this context, publics are defined as dynamic collectives who pursue shared social problems. Members of a public have a set of common attachments, that is, shared commitments to one another and to shared social issues. The members of the public also share a set of social conditions. So in our work, we build upon prior research to specifically leverage an object-oriented publics framing. And so with this lens, we examine not only the human actors within the public, but also the non-human actors in the public that impact the functioning of the public and interactions within and between publics. And so for us, these non-human actors of focus were social networking platforms, features, and content. We identified two publics within our studied organization, the youth community organizer public and the adult staff public. So for youth, a primary goal is choosing a shared social issue to confront and creating and executing plans to address the issue. The youth share a set of social conditions, such as their status as young people who want to establish their influence on various matters. The staff represent a second public. They share the goals of training youth to become leaders and creating social change. They also share social conditions. For example, their interactions with youth are nuanced and fluid. They shift in and out of different roles dynamically. For example, they play a partner role as they work alongside youth. They play a supporting role when they elevate youth to a higher position of decision making. And they also play a supervising role as they evaluate youth in their role as employees. So this diagram provides a conceptual illustration of the findings in our paper, which fall into two main themes. The first set of themes revolve around the complexities that arose as youth and staff used social networking tools to collaboratively pursue their social justice goals. For the sake of time, I'll focus in this talk on our second set of findings around the ways in which youth leverage social computing to expand their public and the challenges that arose. So to expand their public, the youth we studied tried to nurture attachments to social issues amongst their peers. And so by that I mean they tried to create within their peers a commitment to pursuing social justice concerns. One way in which youth sought to expand their public is by enticing others to attend the events that they organized. These events included police-youth dialogue sessions, conflict resolution events, stage shows, and community forums. And one strategy that youth used to encourage peer engagement was creating short video previews, such as the one shown here, of the events that they were planning that they then shared on social media. They used these previews to bring their peers into their creative space, giving them a snapshot of the vibrant, often provocative, and meaningful events that they were developing to address social issues. The youth organizers hoped that these previews would be one way that they could begin to create attachments to social issues amongst their peers. Now, the youth community organizers employed two particular strategies to engage their peers with these videos. So the youth in this organization spend a huge amount of time planning the events that they put on, weeks or often months. Yet they discussed how instead of documenting and sharing this process of developing the event over time, they instead chose to save the posting of the preview videos until the final hours right before an event. For instance, this quote demonstrates how youth use temporality to create excitement within their peers. This participant discusses the use of Facebook Live to video stream their preparation of an event and the importance of waiting to go live until right before the event happens. Another strategy that youth employed was limiting the duration of videos they posted on social media. As opposed to providing extensive details about their work, youth restrained themselves, preferring to only provide a quick window into this work. For example, despite the fact that Instagram now gives users the option of creating longer videos, this teen discussed the importance of shorter videos, just enough to pique his audience's interest. So using an object-oriented public lens, our findings bring attention to not only the people who make up the youth community organizer public, but also the objects, in this case the video previews, that support action within the public and interactions between the youth community organizers and their peers. Both the youth community organizers and the social media videos exhibit a form of agency. The youth use specific strategies as they create social media videos to draw their peers into their public, and then the videos, when shared, play an instrumental role in enabling social action. Their brevity and timeliness are seen as instrumental in helping to engender excitement amongst peers and enticing them to go to events. However, even though youth employ various strategies, they also face challenges in engaging their peers in their civic goals. Youth community organizers discussed how they felt stereotyped by peers. For example, as they worked with police to create better youth-police partnerships and relationships, their peers sometimes labeled them as snitches for partnering with the police. Youth also expressed how hard it was to attract their peers to events when they were labeled as goody-goodies amongst their peers. Using a public's framing, we further impact our participants' experiences. Within the organization we studied, youth are initially recruited into the youth community organizer public such that the public demographics strategically reflect the composition of the communities from which youth are drawn. So through this, youth community organizers begin with many of the same attachments as their peers. They come from similar social circumstances and face many of the same challenges. However, as the youth community organizers go through a process in their work in which they create relationships with people and resources, they shift themselves. For example, in the case of improving relationships with youth and police, youth hold dialogues and other events with police officers to create positive relationships with them. And through these engagements, youth's attachment to the issue of youth-police relationships evolves as they see the importance of healing the friction between youth and police and increasing the sense of confidence in their ability to address this important issue. This transformation reflects a shift in their perspectives on an issue that they originally shared with their community peers. Yet their peers outside of the organization may remain unpersuaded of, for example, the importance of improving police-youth relationships and their ability to play a role in such a change. So to summarize, the youth community organizers evolve as part of this process, and their perspectives on shared social issues evolves, while many of their peers remain the same. And this creates a disconnect in the attachment to issues experienced by youth and their peers. And as I mentioned previously, the practices such as sharing brief videos to provide insights into their work and limiting the content to only right before an event mean that youth provide a very restricted window into their work when they post content online, which can further exacerbate this disconnect between the community organizers and their peers. This issue of shifting attachments became further complicated in the context of mentioning on social media. So, for example, Kathy, a youth organizer, did not want to mention or tag her brother in a social media post for fear of the negative social ramifications it might have for him. She was comfortable herself discussing the issue of police relations online, but she knows that her brother's peers might react negatively if he is perceived as being involved with the police, who can be viewed as more of an oppressive force than people that they would want to be forming a constructive relationship with. So in this case, mentioning or tagging on social media further illustrates the disconnect between the youth community organizer public and their peers, and the challenges that arise as youth try to find ways to bring their peers into their public. Furthermore, the youth we studied were not only worried about how they would be viewed by their peers when posting online, but also how their actions could influence the way that their peers were viewed by others. So using our findings, we encourage future work to explore how novel technological solutions can help youth to manage their shifting attachments. An important question for future work is, how can technology help youth activists to evolve together with their peers in their community? This is an important question for any activist, but particularly those in empowerment organizations where activists experience a particularly intensive and holistic process of shifting attachments. tools that help bridge the gap between those involved in activism in a formal organization and those who are not may help youth to bring more peers into their public. Systems that increase the visibility of the processes at play within the organization to youth's peers could be one step towards addressing this complex challenge. For example, many times peers in the community of the youth we study do not participate in the youth police dialogues. A social computing platform or tool that helps provide community members with a window into how youth's perspectives are evolving during these sessions might help peers in the community to better understand youth's work and how their mindsets around issues are changing. In this case, care would need to be taken to, on the one hand, increase visibility of this evolutionary process, and then on the other hand, accommodate youth values around sharing brief and late-breaking content. So to conclude, in our qualitative study, we examined the practices of an organization engaged in youth-led community organizing. We used a public's lens to help illuminate processes and actors, both human and digital, at play in youth activism. Our findings illustrate ways in which social media mediated the work of youth and their relationships with their peers. And so while I didn't have a chance to cover it today, our paper further characterizes how social media also mediates the relationships between youth and adult staff. So using our findings, we present recommendations for how new technology could be designed to support the shifting attachments to issues amongst youth and their peers, and in the paper, how such tools can better support youth-adult collaborations in the context of youth activism. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Li from Northwestern University. Thank you for the talk. I know you talk about a little bit how youth groups use social media as how youth group build positive relationships with police. I was wondering if you have also seen the youth-led groups use social media or social computing technology to build connections with other stakeholders like policymakers or nonprofit organizations or advocates.
Yeah, so the youth definitely, they engage in a variety of projects. So the ones I described are just a subset, and they definitely engage with a variety of stakeholders, people in positions of power in the communities who address a variety of issues. Online, so it's interesting, their posting online is typically more about the events and not sort of connecting to key individuals in power online and sort of strategically thinking about that. And so that's part of what we're working on with them next is to have more purposeful and strategic posting online and connection with adults. So they are doing it offline for sure, but not so much online, and that's something we're trying to work with them on.
Hi, Cliff Lampy from the University of Michigan. Great stuff, thank you for doing it. And I'm sure since you've published this, there's been, of course, a huge kind of explosion of youth activism, at least in North America. Here's your chance to connect it, right? Like, how do you think that the work that you've seen connects to the Never Again social media movement and what's been happening with youth activism since the time you obviously sent this to Kai and went through the whole process?
Right, yeah, so we do think about this a lot. So part of what we're thinking about now is really how to help youth to understand the social capital that exists within their networks. So the youth that we've worked with definitely, they sort of post generically online. So we're having this event, we're doing this thing, but not sort of thinking about how connecting with specific people in their network might open them up to opportunities to engage with people in power. So while they themselves might not know someone, who could help them, really enact significant change, others within their network might. And so what we're doing now is creating a tool that helps them to visualize the structures of their networks, as well as features of their networks, to think when they go online to post, instead of just thinking about, okay, I'll post, sort of a generic message. Maybe I want to think more specifically about who I hope to reach. And also, I didn't get to talk about it today, but a big part of what we found is that youth don't have a great sense of the impact that they're having when they post online. And so we're trying to think about better ways to help them understand intermediate sense of impact. So I think connecting to so yeah, the Never Again, all of the Parkland activism that's been going on. I think both of those things would be relevant there. So not just in an organizational context like this, but for youth generally.
Hi, John Thomas, Problem Solving International. Thank you, this is really cool. Can you say a little more about, you mentioned that you thought it would work better in terms of not alienating their peers if they did this over a longer period of time and showed more of the evolution of the thinking. Can you say more about specifically how you might see that playing out?
Yeah, so we've been trying to brainstorm around this, and I think one interesting direction would be, a lot of our other work is focused on personal health informatics and thinking about, okay, if I am trying to be more physically active, what kind of data do I want to collect and how do I want to visualize that? And I think we could think about that sort of personal data collection and sharing in an activist context too. So maybe, moving from a physical activity example, from thinking about, okay, I'm going to track, how much I'm active, the intensity of my activity, what are the sorts of metrics that I might want to document about how I'm evolving as an activist, my perspective on my role as an activist, my self-efficacy, my ability to change. Might it be interesting to help youth to share that kind of data? And if it's not that data, what are the kinds of metrics that they might want to share, and how can we create communities around that? So that's one example, but I think there are a lot of directions we could take.